All right, let's continue the story number 2 in this trilogy, beginning in Luke 15, verses 8 through 10. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin." In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Okay, so here we see Jesus continuing his critique of the really poor attitudes that are held by the Pharisees. He chooses, another main actor that, I think the Pharisees would recoil again, first at the shepherd analogy, but now as a woman, being the one who pursues this the search of something lost. And here it's a coin. And then later she rejoices in community, so a lot of similarities with the first. Bailey again points out the inverted chiastic structure. The chiasm center, which is highlighted in red that you see, really does focus in on the same thing that the shepherd story focused in on, rejoicing within community and restoration. Obviously, this element was missing with the Pharisees as they looked on with contempt really at the company that Jesus kept at that table fellowship. So again, Jesus introduces a controversial actor onto the scene. Using a woman as the hero in the search and rescue, Jesus is facing and confronting these long-held Jewish attitudes that viewed women in less than a virtuous light when compared to men. I've included a quote from Ben Sirach. He's writing about 2 centuries prior to Jesus, and it shows the attitudes that people had. He writes, "For the moth comes out of clothes, and a woman's spite out of a woman. A man's spite is preferable to a woman's kindness. Women give rise to shame and reproach." There's many other writings that talked about similar attitudes. However, God never has communicated this negative view regarding women. There are a number of passages throughout the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, that compares God's actions and his feelings to that of a woman and a mother. Psalm 23 in particular is most evident, where the imagery of God preparing a banquet is very much what a woman's role would have been during that time period. And then finally, understanding that this doubling of male-female examples within these stories was very apropos or prevalent in Jesus' teaching. And we see that in Matthew 5, verses 14 and 15, where he speaks of a lamp, lighting of a lamp, which was a woman's role, and the building of a city, which was a man's role. So we have to ask, what significance was the loss of a coin within the society? So culturally, cash or coinage was really a rare commodity. The loss for this woman of 1/10 of her liquid assets would have been deemed of far greater value than that of one day's labor wage, which was that coin's worth. So here we see that Jesus progresses from the telling of the lost sheep to the telling of the lost coin. The parable really does intensify the relative value of the thing that was lost. A sheep is of lesser value than a day's wages, and we'll see later that obviously the prodigal and the brother are much more valuable than a coin and than a sheep. So also the search area is limited to that of a house when compared to the prior example where it was limited to the wilderness. So we've got the wilderness expanse and the sheep, and now we have the search and rescue being done in a house. And just thinking about this, Jesus may be setting up the final parallel comparison between the prodigal who was lost in the wilderness and his older brother who was lost in the house. And that's just my conjecture only. But anyhow, again, what we see is this woman engaged in a careful, diligent search. The Greek word picks up on this. It's called epimelos, which suggests this diligent search. I put in the notes that the design structure of a typical house at that time was very small in structure. It was only about the size of a one-car garage. The floors were laid of basalt, which is a black stone, and with deep cracks in between each piece. And I think I've got an image of that also. And so the windows were elevated high. They were about 7 feet off the ground, and they were small. They were only about 6 inches in height with just slits. And so very little natural light would come through into a home. And so naturally, this woman would need to light a lamp to provide light for that search. So, where the costly search of the shepherd really did involve braving the elements of the wilderness and carrying the sheep back to the town. In comparison, here we see the woman's diligence to find this coin and finding out that it was costly also. The coin, most likely, according to Bailey, was part of household cash given by her husband, and if she was married, obviously. Others have commented that the coin may have been part of a woman who was Bedouin, which is a group of people that were transient. They moved from place to place, and women there they had found had coins that were embedded as part of their necklaces. However, this story that Jesus tells is framed within a community context, as were most of his stories. So this story most likely was within a village setting, pointing to the fact that the lost coin was probably more of a household cash item. So again, before we move to this, one of the final slides, we have to ask, what prompted the shepherd and the woman really to seek and save? To get this possible answer, we can go back to the Old Testament and find out, what are the promptings for God to save the Israelites. And really, there are two primary reasons that you can find, but the first, obviously, is love for his people. It's expressed throughout the Scriptures, but especially in Hosea, chapter 11, verses 1 through 4, God says this: "When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. But the more they were called, the more they went away from me. They sacrificed to the Baals, and they burned incense to images. It was I who taught Ephraim to walk, taking them by the arms. But they did not realize it was I who healed them. I led them with cords of human kindness, with ties of love. To them I was like one who lifts a little child to the cheek, and I bent down and I fed them." So just really super imagery as far as the amazing love that God has. So that's a driving force, obviously. But besides this love for us, I think you see in the Scriptures a motivation for God to save, to demonstrate to surrounding nations and peoples his power to restore and to look on his name as appropriate. In Psalm 23, verse 3, we see, it's for his name's sake that, he saves. And so you get these aspects within the first two stories. You definitely see the second element as a possible motivation for the search. The sheep that was lost was part of someone's small flock back in the community, and to lose that sheep would have brought disrespect to that shepherd. The coin was given in trust by her husband, possibly, or just to prove trustworthy in general, she searched for the coin for her own character. Lastly, what I want to mention is notice how the story of the woman's search and that of the shepherd show just more detail. The woman, takes responsibility for losing the coin by proclaiming in public what she had lost in private. She didn't have to do that. She could have kept it to herself and done the search, but she did take responsibility, which is different from what the shepherd went through. And like the shepherd, she does call others together for celebration. All right. So now we've stepped through two of the three stories spoken by Jesus, used to really challenge and confront, this self-righteous attitude of the Pharisees. Each detail, something was lost. Each speak of an actor in the search of and rescue operation, the shepherd and the woman. Each describe really a costly search. Each story has a rescue of that which is lost, the sheep and the coin, and each have community that rejoices at the rescue of both elements. So I'd like you to do something, to read through the story of Zacchaeus found in Luke 19. And I want you to see if you can identify all or some of these elements that we've talked about here in this story about what it means to be searched for by the shepherd and by the woman. Next week on Sunday, we'll have more of an open discussion. There we can look at what you might have found. So cheers all. Look forward to next week. Peace.